Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jill Smedstad. I'm the Executive Director with the Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. Thank you all for joining us today to talk about wells and groundwater. This webinar is the fourth in a series of webinars that Jackson SWCD, the Rogue River Watershed Council, together with Oregon Water Resources Department, have been hosting as part of the Inland Rogue Water Resiliency Group's follow-up from the Rogue Water Forum that was held in September 2025. The group then identified the desire among many other groups involved in water in the region that they'd like to continue to learn and share from each other about water conditions and water management in the region. So these webinars are designed for the water community and community at large to learn about different aspects of water in specific to the Inland Rogue, this region. So kind of Jackson and Josephine County, um, kind of largely. There's going to be two more webinars between now and the end of November, the end of the year, about other topics. So keep your eye out on our website. I think Sue's going to put that link in the chat and through email too about future topics. This webinar today focuses on wells and groundwater. Grayson Fish from the Oregon Water Resources Department will give an overview of how groundwater works and explain the hydrogeology of the Inland Rogue specifically. And then Kevin Gill is the owner of Clouser Drilling based in Grants Pass, and they provide well drilling services in the region, including areas in Northern California. Kevin will share
Hey,
about the Oregon Groundwater
are
Association,
you on your
aspects of
way?
well drilling and maintenance, and how what they are seeing in Southern Oregon. So I'm going to turn it over to Grayson Fish. He's the hydrogeologist for OWRD and provides services for the Southwest region as part of his role. So thanks, Grayson.
Great. Thank you, Jill. Hi, everyone. My name is Grayson Fish. I am a hydrogeologist with the Oregon Groundwater Resources Department. Um, so the, as I mentioned, the Oregon Water Resources Department is the chief state regulatory agency responsible for management and service in groundwater use in the state. We're a pretty small agency, about 230 people statewide. And the department's primary activities include permitting and protection of water rights, collection of dissemination of water resource data, public education about the state's water resources, and facilitation of water supply solutions. So as I mentioned, I'm a hydrogeologist and I work in the groundwater section, which has about 22 people in it, and they're mostly scientists in that section. And we primarily uh, are responsible for data collection and data management and analysis of groundwater data across the state. Um, we organize and interpret that data, and we primarily support water right transactions, water distribution, and regulation, as well as meeting future needs for the state in terms of groundwater. So these first few slides, we're going to kind of do set of baseline knowledge for groundwater 101. So this might be very familiar to some of you, but it's just good to make sure we're kind of all on the same page. So ultimately, groundwater is rain or snow that has soaked into the ground or it is stored temporarily and is referred to as, and this is referred to as recharge, right? So when that water or snow enters into the ground, that's recharging the groundwater aquifer or reservoirs. And this groundwater is connected to the rest of the hydraulic cycle, what we can see here. And usually where we interact with it is when we pump groundwater out of the aquifer to use for whatever purposes we may need. And this groundwater is always flowing somewhere. So it's not just stagnant on the ground, it is moving. So we can see in this picture, it's perhaps seeping out the surface, exiting its springs, entering freshwater lakes, or ultimately entering into the ocean. In the inland rogue, generally groundwater is following topography and flowing to streams in the local catchment that is being pumped, if it's not first pumped by a well. So a quick functional definition of an aquifer. An aquifer is saturated sediments or rocks that will yield water in a usable quantity in a well. So one of the common ways we interact with these aquifers in the groundwater is to pump it with our wells. So for example, on the left here, we see 3 wells accessing an aquifer under the ground in an unpumped state. When you pump a well, what you're doing is you're causing water to flow towards the well, and the storage is replaced from aquifer around the well, and it forms a cone of depression, as we can see here on these wells. And depending on the nature of the aquifer, that water may flow fast or slow to the well, depending on the properties of the sediments below the ground. Water levels can decline by removing storage. So like we're seeing here on the right, wells are pumping, we're removing storage in the aquifer, it's being spread on crops or used at a school or for a shower. And when we remove storage, we see that water level decline. But storage can also be reduced if recharge is reduced. So for example, if we're seeing less precipitation or snow, there's going to be less recharge entering the ground, and like what we'd experience during a drought. So again, as storage is depleted, water levels decline. And when water levels decline, the energy to pump the same amount of water increases, yields decrease, and wells can go dry, like we see this well here, which is no longer able to access the water aquifer in this situation. So let's move into specifically the inland rogue and what we kind of see in this area. So we talked about aquifers. There are different types. And in the inland rogue, we have two main aquifer types that people are accessing. So we have the first one, which is alluvial aquifer. This is loose sands, gravel, and silt deposited by rivers and streams that easily store and transmit water beneath the surface. The second one, which is very important for this area, is a bedrock aquifer. So these are hard sedimentary or volcanic rocks with small cracks that sometimes hold water. That's a pretty key point. So we'll go back to bedrock in a second here, but let's look at alluvial aquifers. In general, these are very limited in extent in the Rogue. So these are usually only found in major river valleys. So for example, the Bear Creek Valley. And these sediments can rarely exceed 100 feet in thickness. So generally, overall, fairly thin when we talk about aquifers. So here's an example of a well accessing an alluvial aquifer, what we commonly refer to as a water table aquifer, housed in these relatively coarse sediments, so sands and gravels. And this fits in pretty nicely with this diagram of a stream and an unlined canal. So you could picture having a well perhaps by this farmhouse, and you'd be accessing water that is in fairly efficient connection with the streams nearby because of the nature of the sediments, these sands, gravels, and silts, which depending on how they're packaged up, can move water pretty easily. So ultimately, alluvial aquifers are in very strong communication with surface water, and these wells tend to have higher yields and more predictable seasonal fluctuations. So here is a hydrograph of an alluvial well in the Bear Creek Valley, north of Central Point, and not far from Whetstone Creek. If you haven't seen a hydrograph before, I'll explain it briefly. On the bottom here, we have the year going 1960 here to 2020 right here. And then on the y-axis, we have depth to water, so 0, 5, 10, 15 feet, something like that. And then over here in parentheses, we have the elevation of groundwater. So what we're seeing is a time series of water levels in a well. And generally, you can see that there are some years where we do see a pretty significant drop during certain times of the year in this well. But generally, what we see is this 5-foot seasonal swing of these wells over this long period of time. And this is because there's a constant input to this portion of the aquifer from nearby surface water. So it's very consistent. Moving to fractured bedrock, you can probably already see some pretty big differences here. Fractured bedrock in the inland rogue is usually marine sedimentary or volcanic bedrock. It's been metamorphosed, which means it's been altered by heat or pressure. Or it could be perhaps an intrusive volcanic, so something like the Grand's Place Pluton, so magma that cooled below the surface and is now present. Typically, when we're talking about fractured bedrock wells, these are low yielding. So we're talking less than 10 gallons per minute, and it's a very low storage system. So again, storage is the capacity of the formation to hold water. How much volume of water can be held below the surface at any time? And looking at the diagram to the right, you can see how little water is held in these fractures compared to what was depicted in the alluvial well diagram. And what this means is that fractured rock aquifers are heavily dependent on previous year's precipitation to replenish storage, so that recharge, and are highly variable. So well yield is dictated by the size and interconnectedness of fractures intersected by the well. So we can look over here, this little well here doesn't go very deep, but it's able to access a fracture with water in it. This well here goes deeper and perhaps doesn't find a fracture with water. And these could be connected or not connected, depending on where you are in the formation. And these fractures typically become smaller and less frequent with depth. So it's the pressure of the earth forcing them closed and perhaps precipitation of minerals. So not quite depicted on this, but just think that if you're drilling deeper, it may become harder to find a well-yielding fracture as you go. This isn't the case in some parts of Oregon, where you can go deeper and find more water. So moving back to another hydrograph, this is now a hydrograph of a fractured bedrock well. So one thing that's different on this one, this blue line here indicates that we have a pressure transducer in the well. So this allows us to collect hourly groundwater level measurements and download them during our quarterly visits, which are represented by the red triangles. Those are a manual measurement like I or another hydrogeologist takes. And we see that we have much larger year-to-year variability in this well. So the water level is starting going high, it's going low, and that all depends on how much precipitation the local area is receiving. So for example, in 2020 and 2022, we saw declining groundwater levels because we had those are drier years. However, moving on to 2025, we saw a much higher water level due to higher precipitation observed. And then obviously, as we know now, in 2026, we're seeing much drier conditions. We're seeing declining groundwater levels as well. So the seasonal swing as well is relatively minor. It's about a 5-foot swing. However, it's not uncommon to see over 25 feet of seasonal swing in some fractured bedrock wells. So for example, here's a different one located southwest of Grants Pass. We're seeing much deeper groundwater levels here, 180 feet, 200 feet, things like that. That's because this well is on top of a ridge. But as I mentioned, we're seeing much higher seasonal water level fluctuations from going to about 30 feet difference in groundwater depth between the spring and end of fall. So quick look at a geologic map of the Western Applegate here. For those of you who are familiar with the area, right here in the center is where the Applegate River and Williams Creek meet. So these bluish and yellowish are all alluvial deposits, but everything else we're seeing here is all much older bedrock. This cross-section line, this black line here, equates to this cross-section at the bottom, which kind of gives us an idea of what this all looks like below the surface. And much of the bedrock that we see here are what we call accreted terrains, or rocks that formed under the ocean and were pushed up against the continent along the subduction zone out to our west. The vertical scale of this cross-section goes from about 3,000 feet above land surface and 3,000 feet below sea level, excuse me. So these alluvial deposits here barely show up. You probably, I mean, this isn't very big, but you can barely see them. So what this all means is that most people are accessing, if you have a domestic well, are accessing bedrock for their water. And the amount of water you can encounter will vary considerably, even property to property. So for example, here are the well logs of 2 wells drilled in the Applegate across the street from each other in the early 70s. The well on the left encounters bedrock at about 18 feet and extends to a total depth of 100 feet and produced 26 gallons per minute at the time of drilling, or reported. The well on the right encounters bedrock at 39 feet, extends to a total depth of 185 feet, but comparatively produces a much lower volume of 3.5 gallons per minute at that same in 1973, so at roughly the same time period of being drilled. So you can see that there's large variability in what you might encounter in any given area because of the nature of those fractures and how well they are connected or not connected. So quickly here, we'll run through some publicly available or information and resources for groundwater data in the state. And I can come back to this and leave this up while we're talking, so you can scan this QR code. But generally, we try to make the information we receive, collect, or produce publicly available, and it can be accessed through our groundwater information system. And this includes static water level measurements that we receive from local governments, permittees, individuals, in addition to groundwater data that department staff themselves are collecting from monitoring wells around the state. Uh, So here's a quick picture of our groundwater information system in terms of mapping. So this mapper has some different layers you can turn off and on. You can show us where we have recorder wells, those wells I showed you that have a blue line, our current observational wells that we're receiving data from, and then even past data perhaps that we have received or collected, but is no longer current, but still helpful for understanding historic conditions. You can just turn things off and on, such as here the geologic map layer, and or administrative boundaries like water master districts. And then lastly, as we are at a time of drought, if you are experiencing dry well or your well starts to produce less, first thing we like to say is to try and contact a pump contractor to be sure the problem isn't with the malfunctioning pump or something else going on with the well. But if the problem is confirmed to be a low water level in your well because of those declining water levels, we really appreciate you letting us know. So visiting this link here, and you can report your dry well, where you are, when it started going dry, other qualitative things like that. And it helps us narrow in and understand where people are experiencing these dry wells. So we can do further analysis and understand what's the root cause or what's causing this for people. Okay, and that was just a brief overview. So happy to take some additional questions now, and I'll go back to the QR code if people are interested in scanning that.
Here in the I'm going to start over. Kevin lives here. Kevin Gill, thank you for presenting, lives in the Rogue Valley here, well, actually in the Illinois Valley, and is the owner and operator of Clouser Drilling. So thank you so much for joining us today, Kevin.
You bet, Sue. Thanks to you and Jill for facilitating this seminar. And just want to plug Grayson real quick. We've worked with him on some projects out there. I really appreciate his expertise. And when it comes to geology and hydro, he knows a lot more than I do, but I will interject a few things just to reinforce what we're talking about. So we can move forward, Jill. Here's just an overview of some of the things we're going to discuss today. And if you do have an idea or thought, just jot it down and we'll come back at the end. I'm going to do a little bit about the Oregon Groundwater Association, talk about the affiliation I have there, a little bit about geology and groundwater in the area, how to plan where to drill, how wells are drilled, just basic information and what we're seeing now in the field. And then one that's real important is how to keep your well and things working correctly. So we can go ahead, Jill. The Oregon Groundwater Association is an association made up of contractors, some of the state people participate and help, manufacturers and technical people. We started in 1949. We do outreach and education with schools and kids. We do state lobbying efforts and just try to create public awareness of how to use water responsibly, beneficial use without waste. We can go to the next slide. Here's some of the outreach things we've done. Up in the upper left, you can see an overshot of some rigs set up in front of the Capitol in Salem, and the drill rig's actually one of ours. There's some pump trucks there. In the upper right, we're at the Clean Water Festival, Children's Clean Water Festival with fifth graders, and we do. One little girl asked us one time, it was cute. She says, "Can you catch fish with that machine?" In our industry, if you're fishing, it means you've lost something down the hole and you're trying to retrieve it. So that's not quite as fun as the other kind of fishing, but it was cute to hear that. You can see we have classroom presentations for the kids, and then we go to the Ag Fest and do a bunch of outreach there too, and that's at the state fair. Go ahead, Jill. Real quick, Grayson talked about geology in our area, but in a minute, I'm going to show you a map of Josephine County, and it shows you how many different formations we have, and that really makes a difference as whether you get water or not, and whether the water is good water chemistry or not. So we'll talk more about that here in a second. Go ahead. This map is a map of Josephine County. It's the 1979 edition, but all the different colors of the geologic formations in our valley or in our county. I do want to say if you really like geology, which some people surprisingly are really into it, the USGS just published an interactive map that's online, and you can Google USGS interactive map. And on that, you can see, you can type in an address or location, and then you can actually click on the geologic units, and it gives you mineral composition and some really comprehensive stuff. There's also a app called Rocked that I use in the field, and University of Wisconsin downloaded the geology maps in a mobile app. So anyway, it's pretty cool. But this just shows you how many different things are out there to drill in. Some are good, some are not. Go ahead, Jill. Um, to get water, you got to be in a good location to get water. I could drill a well right along the Rogue River on Merlin Galice Road, and there's all these nice drainages coming in, feeding the Rogue River. Jump off Joe Creek comes in there, and the formation is shale. And I will bet you a lot of money I don't get a good well drilling right by the Rogue River on Merlin Galice Road, because the matrix of that rock is sedimentary, and the fissures and cracks are all sealed up with those sediments. So some areas are good and some are not. But you also have to have a way to get your machine in there. You need to meet setbacks from utilities, from septic systems, road easements, and then you want to make sure you can get in there later if you after the well's constructed, that you don't build a house over the well or a garage or plant trees near it. You got to be able to get to it to maintain it. And then when you're planning what to drill, you want to make sure your goal is to design the well to hold up over the long haul. Go ahead, Joe. This is a photograph that shows you some different machines for different applications. The upper left is a cable tool rig that pounds the formation, and then they bale the rock out of the formation. And there's still some of those out in use, and some of those are used for developing wells too. In the upper right is a machine. That's one of our machines drilling in the Illinois Valley in Takelma. There's a lot of boulders out there. So we use under-reaming systems. Instead of drilling the pilot hole, we'll drill and drive the casing at the same time. Lower left is Klamath County, where there's a lot of water, and we're setting 16-inch casing in the Klamath Marsh and a big well over there. And then lower right is a dual rotary rig that can actually has a lower table and can drill and drive the casing at the same time. Really nice machine. Go ahead. Some more photos. Upper left photo is some casing that we pulled out of a well. We did not drill the well. It had been drilled, and they were having trouble getting their pump in their well. And I think you can see why that might be. That casing has a big shear or tear in it, and they had driven it into the rock with no drive shoe on the bottom, and it compromised the casing. So we pulled it all out and reconstructed that well. Lower left, that's an ag well in Klamath County that did about 3,500 gallons a minute. In the Rogue Basin, there's just not that kind of water here, and Grayson can attest to that. You're in the 0 to 250, maybe 300 gallon a minute range in the Rogue Valley. So, and then just a couple of other job photos. Go ahead. I want to talk about well construction real quick, because sometimes well failures everything gets labeled into the well failed because the aquifer's gone and the well went dry. But sometimes the well fails because of a well construction issue. So when a person has a problem with a well, and like Grayson said, they've looked at the pump equipment and made sure everything's working correctly, we actually have cameras and we try to find out what is actually going on with the well. For example, if it has a liner in it, the static water level should be equal inside and outside the liner. And if it's not, that means the water can't enter the pump chamber, and there's been a bridge or a caving. And that might be due to not enough casing or other issues, improper well design. But I do want to say that well construction is very important, and it's also a well can fail because maybe it's been over pumped, and doesn't have the correct pump for the application. And right now we're seeing a lot of with the economy, a lot of do-it-yourselfers getting pumps on the internet and trying to save money, and they're not getting a system professionally installed or designed. And then quite often we get calls back with either people trying to help them figure out how to put the pump in, or why they're having problems with the well, and it's mainly due to improper pump design and installation. Go ahead, Jill. Okay, so everybody's concerned about, well, hey, what's going on in real time right now in Southern Oregon with our water situation, and I'm including Northern California too, because we work down there too, and some of the formations are very similar. The Colstein Formation bleeds over from Ashland down into the Colstein Valley, and some of the rocks they have are similar. So I'm just going to kind of lump it in, but the good water areas are still really good, and the bad water areas are even worse than they were before. So just to recap there, they never were good, and now they're strained even more. Um, Water chemistry is changing a little bit. Grayson talked about that a little bit, but what we're seeing in some areas of our valley, um, there's some saltwater areas that have existed for a long time, or areas with high iron or boron or arsenic. The salt areas seem to be getting, I think partly because we're testing water more often, we know our water better, but we seem to be seeing more occurrence of saltwater intrusion. Um, and then what we're seeing too is economically, things are kind of slowing down. So rural developments kind of slowed down here the last couple of years. And more of the work that we're seeing is well issues with production in the wells. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. Like I mentioned, it could be the aquifers declining, and it also mean that improper construction, over pumping, those kinds of things. Go ahead, Jill. Um, One often overlooked area is maintaining the well. We'll talk to people about their well and try to get more information about their pump system, and they may not have good records of what was installed, when it was installed. So we try to educate our consumer, hey, keep your well report handy, show them where to find it, have a file with your pump records in it. Uh, you should get your water tested annually, so you should know what's in the water. And one thing I want to say about that is the first test you should get is at the source. So people will say, well, I got my test done at the hose bib by the barn. Well, sometimes that hose bib by in the barn has not had clean hoses hooked to it. And you really you want to know what the source is. And then if you have a problem, you can work your way out from there. And the source is at the wellhead, or the next best place to take water samples is at the pressure tank. And better to have a professional pull those samples and help you interpret the information you get. The pump system should be annually checked. And if your pump system's not working correctly, there's a lot of things I could go through here. I don't want to get too involved in it, but your pressure tank needs to have the proper pre-charge, and you don't want your pump cycling on and off. And then you need to know if you have water leaks or not. And so if your pump's running when it shouldn't be, you might have an issue there with a water leak or a stuck toilet float. And a surprising amount of water can be wasted that way. And then people should use the water within the guidelines that are laid out with the exempt use domestic wells. There's guidelines, and we can have information later on that, how much water you're allowed to use and how you're supposed to use it. And then if you have a water right, there's specific amounts of water and how you can use it if you have a water right for commercial purposes. Go ahead. Again, this is just reinforcing what we just talked about there. But one thing that's important is to have your water level checked in your well. Grayson showed those charts that the state is observing those wells, which is awesome information. Individual landowners should know what their static water level trends are in their own well, and they can work with a pump company or a well driller to get that information. But I think it's important if they track that annually just to see what's going on with their own well. A lowering static water level is the first sign of trouble. And then Sue's going to give some information out at the end some resources and stuff, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but there's definitely ways to get a lot of information. One of them is our website. We have a resource tab on that. Go ahead. This is a sample well log. Just going to say real quick, it just talks about this is one that we drilled for the prospect school, but it talks about who we drilled it for, how the well was constructed, where the well is located, the formations encountered, and the water bearing zones. In section 10, it has details of each water bearing zone. Old well logs don't have this much information. So if you get a log from like 1980, it may just say, here's how much water we got, but it doesn't show the different water bearing zones. So I really appreciate how Water Resources over the years has updated their well log in Oregon to encompass as much information that you can get on one page. There's a lot of data right here. And I do believe it's a better formatted log than California, just for taking a look at. Go ahead. Here's a sample of how on the left-hand side we got three different wells. The one on the left showing the grade at the well, you can see the soil sloping or crowning away from the well, and that means any runoff is going to go away from that wellhead. The middle one shows relatively flat ground, but still better. And on the poor side, you've got a depression there where water could pool and sit around your wellhead, and that is definitely not something you want. And also the casing's a little bit low. It needs to be a foot above grade to meet standard. And then on the right hand side, it just shows how well seals can be finished off. The one on the left, conventional discharge with your water line coming up the center, electrical on the left, and the vent on the right. And that vent can be taken out and used as an access port for checking water level measurements. The one on the right is called a pitless adapter and has the water line comes out underground, so you can't see it, but it's protected from freezing. I do not think this is a good way to go in our area because we don't have a lot of freezing issues sustained, and it's hard to get water samples. It's hard to see what's going on, and I'm not a fan of the pitless for our area. Go ahead. This one I'm not going to spend much time on because it's really busy, but it does show on the right-hand side the well, and then you can see the pitless discharge underground coming into the pressure tank. And then below on the right-hand side, you can see the submersible pump and cable and everything that's down the well. So that just gives you an idea of a standard pump system. We do encourage people not to build the pump house over the wellhead. You can have it 15 or more feet away, and that way you can get to your well for maintenance, whether it be cleaning it, pulling the pump, and then have your mechanical stuff far enough away to where it doesn't impede access to the well. Go ahead. These are some drilling tools that are used to drill a well. The tricone bit on the left-hand side is the one that was patented by the Hughes family. So a great deal of their initial wealth came from that drill bit right there. It's the gold standard still for drilling in alluviums and gravels and sands, and those maps that Grayson showed earlier, the low valleys. When we're drilling in that's the bit we use. On the right-hand side is a bedrock hammer that we use for drilling in solid bedrock like granite or basalt, and even some of the sedimentary rocks. And then in the middle, we've got overburden tools for drilling in boulders, cobbles, stuff that moves around. And if you try to drill your pilot hole, the boulders are just going to pop back in. And those tools help you drill a straight hole and get your casing where it needs to go to get a case off the unstable material. Go ahead. And these are some of the materials that go into a well. Upper left is a steel casing that is used for structural integrity of the hole. That drive shoe that's just below it should have been on that piece of casing that I showed you guys earlier that had the big rip in it. That drive shoe is used to reinforce the bottom of the casing. On the bottom of the screen here, you can see some stuff that is dry and looks like gravel, and it actually comes out of that bag that says hole plug, and it's a bentonite, which is a natural clay, and when it's hydrated, it swells up and can create an impermeable seal. So that is used for sealing the annular space when we drill a well so that the nothing from the surface can get into your aquifer. And then you can see some PVC liner there. There's some solid in the upper right, and in the middle we've got screens, and that's used for filtration in your well. To keep your pump from ingesting sands and sediments and stuff like that that can prematurely wear it out. I saw quite a few questions coming in there, so I think Sue's going to be facilitating those, and we'll be glad to go through.
Thanks, Kevin. Wealth of information. There are a few questions. I'm going to skip over mine. We'll get to those later. Um, could you please elaborate on your recommendation to not build a well house over the head?
Yeah, that's a really good question and an important one. So we recommend over the wellhead either a real small structure that can be easily removed, or even one of those Decora mock rocks, and the pump house for your pressure tank, your controls, and all your valves and stuff. Recommending some people put that equipment in a garage, which is fine, or you can build a pump house that's a minimum of 6 by 6, I would say, with a full size door that you can easily keep track of that equipment, keep it from freezing, but you can still get to your wellhead. And so your pump house should be a minimum of 10 to 15 feet away from your wellhead. So you can get the drill rig over it if you ever have to. And cutting a hole inside the pump house, it works for a pump truck, but not cutting a hole in the roof doesn't work for getting a drill rig. We'd have to demolish the pump house. And we've had to do that.
Got it. I just wanted to share a couple of resources available for people who might need support. The first is a grant program that is administered by the agency that I work for, the Oregon Water Resources Department. It's called the Well Abandonment Repair and Replacement Fund, or we call it WARF. And all the information, the general information, is up here on the screen. But basically, it's for homeowners or members of a federally recognized tribe who need help financially to repair or replace a well due to drought or wildfire. And due to drought means that there's been a drought declaration. So that would be everyone in our region this year. It did recently get an additional $1 million in funding from state funds because the demand is so high. But what I wanted to say is if you or someone you know or people you work with could benefit from this program, they accept completed applications on a first come, first served basis. So if it's something you're interested in, feel free to reach out to me or the information on the screen, and you can get the general information and figure out if it's something that could benefit you or the person that you're inquiring on behalf. And then just wanted to make note of some of the resources that are out there. Some of these were brought up in Kevin or Grayson's presentations, but these are hyperlinks to them. And I also just want to note that there is a water well owner's handbook that is published by the Oregon Health Authority and Oregon Water Resources Department. And it provides a lot of information in there about both maintaining your well or the guidelines for using your water that Kevin referred to. Sometimes we don't even know what those are, and it has all that in there. Also on Clouser Drilling's website, there's a lot of really good information. Encourage you to go poke around there. OSU has a well water program website that has a lot of information, educational resources. And then Oregon Health Authority's Domestic Well Safety Program has a lot of resources as well, and they focus a little more on water quality. If you go to our website, Water Resources Department, you'll notice we focus more on quantity. So between these various resources, you're going to get hopefully what you need related to both quantity and quality. So just wanted to note that. And then I'm going to put in the chat both my email, and Kevin has generously offered his email. If you go to those resources and you're like, oh my gosh, this is too much, or I don't know where to go, or it doesn't answer my question, feel free to reach out and I'll try and head you in the right direction.
And we can open it up to more questions for the two of them. I'm going to stop the recording now, so thanks for those that joined us on the recording. Here we go.